edition of the Henson Memorial Wednesday Night Bible Study. I am your pastor, as you know, Aaron H. Henson, and it is good that you all joined us again on tonight. We're not going to delay tonight because this is a good lesson, it's a good word. I want to make sure we get it all in. But before we get started, as you all know, we always start with a word of prayer. Father God, right now in the name of Jesus, we thank you once again for life, health, and strength. We thank you for today, for this is a day that you have made, and we shall rejoice and be glad in it. Oh God, we thank you for this opportunity to once again be able to come into your presence to study your word. And as we go into your word on tonight, we ask that, oh God, that you help us to enlighten us, to give us a richer understanding of your word on tonight, oh God. That your word will help us and empower us, oh God, that we may be healed, delivered, and set free, oh God. In the name of Jesus we pray, we thank God, and amen. Again, it is good to be back with you on this week, and I thank you all for joining me. I hope these sessions have been helping, given the midst of everything that's going on. We have to stay away to connect, and this is our best way to do that for right now. So, as always, we're continuing to encourage everyone as far as the social distancing is concerned, the frequent washing of hands, and as always, staying inside if at all possible. Doesn't happen all the time, but certainly if you don't have to go out, please don't go out. Tonight's lesson is really talking about a great topic on tonight. It's talking about love and how we don't want to lose our first love. You talk about and think about a first love, and a lot of times we think about that high school sweetheart, college sweetheart, whatever the case may be. I actually married my college sweetheart, and I thank God for her every day. She has been the greatest blessing in my life for the past, will be 21 years in November, and I just continue to thank God for her. But on tonight, we're talking about a different kind of love. I mean, certainly the love between a husband and a wife, that significant other, is going to be really important, and it really shows us what it means to love, because usually in a situation like this, you have an even exchange where both parties are loving each other, both parties are willing to sacrifice for each other, both parties are willing to do for each other, both parties are willing to go beyond the extra mile for each other, because they put each other before themselves. But on tonight, it's that love in addition to, because God's love is greater than any love that we could ever try to have in and of ourselves. And while we know what it's like to love, still God's love is a cut above or a step higher than what we even know. And so tonight's lesson is entitled, Don't Lose Your First Love. And that first love is Jesus Christ. Why? Because he first loved us. He first loved us over 2,000 years ago when he sent his only begotten son to die on the cross for our sins. And then 3 days later, he rose up again with all power so that we may once again, as we like to say, have a right to the tree of life. But even with that, what it means, what it gets down to is that we have an opportunity to continue to talk to God, to continue to try to get better every day. We look and we understand and learn about God's grace and mercy. It is that is the thing that allows us to move forward day in and day out, because even on our best days, the Bible lets us know that our righteousness is like filthy rags. And so it is only because of God's grace and his mercy that we're able to get chance after chance after chance after chance. And even after looking at tonight's lesson, understanding God's love, you really don't want all those chances. When you really get to understand the love of God in your life, you don't want to mess up. You don't want to do anything that's going to hurt God. And so every day you're striving to get better for him. There is some background readings for tonight. The first is Deuteronomy 7 and 9, which reads, Know therefore that the Lord thy God, he is good, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him, and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. I read that and I got excited. I was talking with my family a little bit about this earlier, and to know that God's love is extending out 1,000 generations. And then I began to think about it a little deeper than that, because I'm one generation, which goes 1,000. But then now my children, which are a part of my 1,000-year generation, they become their own generation after a while. And so that 1,000 years starts all over again with them. And then hence, in time, my grandchildren, they'll start a new generation, and that 1,000 years kicks in all over again. So really, the 1,000 years, for every generation, you get another 1,000 years. Or the 1,000 years starts over again, I should say. And so it's just a continuous, perpetual system of love that God has for us. Micah 6:8 says, He hath showed thee, O man, what is good, and what doeth the Lord require of thee, but to do justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. Zephaniah 3:17, the Lord thy God in the midst of thee is mighty. He will save. He will rejoice over thee with joy. He will rest in his love. He will joy over with singing. That was something else that kind of got my attention, because as much as God does for us, we talk about the fact that he sent his only begotten son. The fact that his son gave his life for us on the cross. We talk about God's grace and mercy, how's he extending our days to ensure that we have an opportunity to really get to know who God is and to really get a chance to come to him. He never forces himself on us. The Bible declares also that the Lord stands at the door and he knocks. Well, where is he knocking? He's not knocking at the front door, but he's knocking at the core door of our hearts, waiting for us to allow him in. And when we finally do, when we finally get that understanding, he's rejoicing over that. And I just think that that's a marvel, right? Because God is the one that created us. God is the one that's doing for us. We're nothing without him. He's providing and sustaining us every single day. And yet and still, when we come to him, he's yet rejoicing, as if to say he didn't do anything for us already. And I don't know about you, but I really think that that's excellent. I think that's fantastic. And I thank God for that. Mark 12:30 says, and thou shalt love thy God, the Lord thy God, with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. For this is the first commandment. And then 1 Corinthians 8:3, but if any man love God, the same is known of him. Don't lose your first love. And so this becomes the background reading for tonight. And there was one word that I wanted to read a definition for that really stood out when we talk about don't lose your first love. And that is just it right there, first love. First love is a strong affection for another arising out of a kinship or personal ties preceding all others in time, order, and importance. The object of attachment, devotion, or admiration preceding all others in time, order, or importance. So we talk about first love and understanding what that first love is. And then another word that sticks out that we were looking at earlier is the fact of lose. It's easy to lose things when you're not intentional. It's easy to misplace things. Oftentimes, many of us have misplaced our cell phones, laptops, computers, car keys. For some people, depending on how big the parking lot is at Walmart, Sam's Club, or Target, you can lose your car. And it's not a good feeling when you lose something and you're desperately wanting to find that thing. And so it becomes the same thing with Christ. We don't want to lose Christ, because to lose Christ can be very detrimental, especially given times that we're in right now. I know we were talking earlier about this here at the house. We've had much discussion, as I'm sure a lot of families have. This stay-home order is really starting to take a challenge on us, but we're yet trusting God in that. But in our conversations, as we were talking earlier today and talking about it, understanding that without God, again, we're nothing. And we quote these scriptures over and over and over again. But really, because we have God on the inside of our hearts, like David admonished us to in Psalms, it kind of helps to give us a peace of mind. Even throughout the sorrow, the disappointment, the things that we've had to deal with throughout this COVID-19. Because we have the Lord on our side, because we have him in our hearts, he is yet able to navigate us and show us the way. And I thank God for that, because it really made me think about those who don't know the Lord and the pardoning of their sins, those who do not have a true relationship with Christ, trying to handle something of this magnitude on their own. It really becomes very, very challenging. And so we continue to pray for those persons especially, that God will allow them to keep their mind, keep their sanity, not go into depression, not feel like they have to turn to alcohol or drugs or whatever the case may be. We're yet praying for those people because I can only imagine how hard it is now trying to navigate during these times and not have the love of Christ on the inside. And so we're going into 1 John 4 and 7. And we're just going to expound a little bit on this tonight. I really wanted to get into this lesson because on the surface, it really seems something that you hear all the time. It really can become mundane, if you will. Seems like now in 2020, we're always looking for, well, pre-COVID-19, we're always looking for the next big revival. We're looking for the next big healing meeting. We're looking for the next evangelist or the next concert to come in town. And while all those things are good, those things encourage us, they help us, they help to build our relationships, but we have to have a foundation. And so often that foundation is built of a lot of basic things. And in a foundation, when you're dealing with those basic things, some things don't change. Wood is wood, and you need wood for a good foundation. Concrete is concrete, and you're going to need concrete for a good foundation. And you have to structure those things in such a way to where it's not going to come apart and that it can stand until you're ready for it to come down. Now, I'm not a builder, but my grandfather was. And I understand that he certainly understood those principles because our church has been standing since 1955. And it goes back to the foundation that he did as far as pouring the concrete, as far as putting the wood structures in place that needed. And so it is a good foundation. Henson Memorial Church of God in Christ is built on a good foundation. And so spiritually it becomes the same thing as we're looking at those foundations. And certainly on tonight when we begin to talk about love, that's where we are. And so in 1 John 4 and 7, it starts off and it says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God." Verse 8 says, "He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love." Now, this becomes important because we have people in our lives that literally we could probably do without. People that frustrate us, people that we don't quite gel with, and we have to really be careful with those people because those people we still have to love, we still have to pray for as well. And we have to be careful not to allow those people to have us miss out from heaven. Because as it clearly states here, if it says, he that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. And so that means we have to love everybody. 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 You're thinking of questions now. What about this? What about this person? What about this situation? It really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we have to love because if we don't, it lets us know right here that we don't know God because God is love and that's how he operates. Verse 9 goes on to say, "In this was manifested the love of God toward us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him." Now watch this. Because this becomes important to understand that the time that Jesus spent on the earth, his 3 years of public ministry, as we learn more about what Jesus did during his public ministry, we can see how it benefited us back then and really how it continues to benefit us today. And so we have to be careful. We have to understand, again, verse 9, "In this was manifested the love of God toward us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world that we may live through him." I mean, really just to understand an equation between God the Father and God the Son. We do have the Trinity, so we don't break them up, God the Holy Spirit. But to understand that God the Son said, "Give me a body. I'll go. I'll do what no one else can do." I mean, to understand the psychology behind that, to know that Jesus, God the Son, was up in heaven enjoying all the benefits, all the glory that was due him, said, "I will set this aside for just a little while to go save humanity." That becomes really deep. That becomes really precious. And so verse 10 goes on to say, herein is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us, and sent his son to be the propitiation for our sins. Now in verse 11 says, beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. Read that again. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. No man, verse 12, has seen God at any time. But if we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and his love is perfected in us. Now watch this. His love is perfected in us through our practice of love toward one another. The better we learn to love one another, the closer we get to God. And so if that be true, which is saying in the scriptures, then just the opposite is true, which is why it's so important that we love. Because if we're loving and God is in us, then like I said, the opposite is just true. If we're not loving, then God is not in us. Now, there's a portion of God in us all, but when we begin to talk about the relationship that God truly wants to have with us, we have to learn to love. Point blank. There's no way around it. Very basic, but oh so important. Verse 13 goes on to say, hereby know we that we dwell in him, and he in us, because he given us of his Spirit. Well, the Bible declares in 1 Corinthians 6:20, for ye are bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. So God has given his Spirit inside of us. And again, verse 13 says, hereby know we that dwell in him, and he in us, because he hath given us of his Spirit. That's why John 15:5 is so crucial in my life, when it declares that at the end of that verse, without God, we can do nothing. We can do nothing without God. Bible lets us know that we can do nothing without him, and that really holds true. Even our very existence is because of God's Spirit on the inside of us, not through any good of our own. Even with scientists today, they've learned how to clone humans, the hands, the feet, the hair, the face. They've learned how to do all that. But the one thing that they have yet to do is to be able to replicate God's Spirit inside of us. We can do nothing in and of ourselves. And that's just it. That just becomes the bottom line. We just cannot do anything on our own. And we have to really understand that. We have to really grasp that. We owe Jesus everything. Everything. We owe him everything. And so the things that he's asking us to do in this walk, during its time, in theory, it should all be okay. Now, because of the power of choice, we don't always agree with that. Because God has given us choice, sometimes we want to go this way and that way and that way and this way and do things our own way. But I preached a message one time that let us know we can't come to the King any kind of way. God wants us coming to him in such a way that he can recognize us, be with us, connect with us, and that is through love. Verse 14 says, and we have seen and do testify that the Father sent the Son to be the Savior of the world. That whosoever shall confess that Jesus is the Son of God, God dwelleth in him, and he in God. And we have known and believed the love that God hath to us, because God is love. And he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Now watch this, because I don't want to get you trapped up with this. But the passage, this particular passage, becomes really loaded, because to walk in love is to walk in God. And to walk in God means you have to love God. And to love God means that you're keeping his commandments. That's in Exodus 20. Because Jesus said in John 14 and 15, if you love me, keep my commandments. And to go a step further, Jesus says in John 10 and 30 that he and his Father are one. So God is really saying all this himself. God is saying these things to us through his Son, Jesus Christ. They are one. And again it says, and we have known and believed the love that God hath to us. God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. So again, because of all those things, it opens up to how God really wants us to address him, come to him, respect him, love him, because we see all those things in Exodus 20 when we begin to list the commandments. And we have to follow those commandments because we say we love God. And God said, if you love me, you will then keep my commandments. Now, how about that? Verse 17 says, herein is our love made perfect, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment. Because as he is, so are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear. Fear, 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 but perfect love casteth out fear. Because fear hath torment, and he that feareth is not made perfect in love. There's no fear in love, because to know God and to understand God, then you understand that God has no equal. You have God, you have fear. You have God, you have fear. You have fear, and you have God. God took fear out. Just that. There is no fear in love, because to know God and understand, then you understand that God has no equal, because God is the ultimate power, and there is no one greater. Fear is no match for God. Depression, no match for God. Sickness, no match for God, because God is the ultimate power. Now, we don't always understand everything that God does, but we accept what God does, and we understand that, again, there is no equal to God. So when we're on the Lord's side, when we're walking with him, when our relationship is like this with God, we're doing the very best we can every single day, we don't have to fear anything, because there is no greater power. Even now, even in the midst of what's going on, this pandemic is nothing for God. God is the ultimate power. And so even as we're doing the social distancing, even as we're doing the stay-home orders, even as we're washing our hands frequently, the times that we have to go out for food or for gas, or when our jobs are deemed essential and we have to go out and work, we can yet go out and have no fear, because God is the ultimate power. And with God, we already win. Now, some people may think and wonder, and they talk about the deaths that we've experienced, but one thing's for sure, the Bible lets us know there is an appointed time for us to be born. There's an appointed time for us to die or transition. To everything there is a season. So we cannot get that confused with what's going on now with the COVID-19. We have to understand that it is an appointed time. And we as saints, we believe that, we hold on to that, and we continue to believe those things, and we trust God in that. And we have to be careful, because I understand it's COVID-19, but really COVID-19 is no different than diabetes, no different than high blood pressure, no different than a car accident. The death may be wrapped up in those things, but understand it was an appointed time. It was an appointed time, and so we have to understand that, accept that, and we yet tell God thank you, because he ultimately knows and understands more and better than we ever would. And so verse 19 says, we love him because he first loved us. Never get that out of your system. Always keep that close to your heart. We love him because he loved us first. He loved us first. And then 20 finally says, if a man say, I love God, and hate his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother, whom he hath seen, how then can he love God whom he hath not seen? Well, this just goes back to us loving one another. We're always looking for the dunamis power. We're always looking for the marvelous healings. We're always looking for the deliverance sessions that are coming forth. We want to see God's power manifested. Well, we have to be willing to put in the work. God talks about love. We have to be willing to love one another. And in that love, in keeping God's commandments, he tells us to study his word. He tells us to study the Bible day in and day out. We should meditate on his word day and night. He also tells us to pray. Pray without ceasing. We keep those lines of communication open with God every single day. And we don't stop. And I remember a particular passage in the Bible when what would have been the disciples, the original disciples, they were trying to do a deliverance session, and they couldn't do it, and they didn't understand what was going on. And Jesus came, and he did what they could not do. And when they got alone, they asked the question, well, Jesus, how come we couldn't do what you did? We did everything that we saw you've been doing all this time. How come we couldn't do the same thing? And Jesus simply responded and said, some things only come out through praying and fasting. It's a simple message. Sometimes it can seem a little redundant, but this is the foundation on which everything else is built. Love, that is the greatest thing. And when we break that love down and begin to really understand what that love means and what it's about, we go back into our praying, our fasting, and our reading of our word, the meditation of our word. We don't stop. We continue to press forward. Well, this says don't lose your first love. I hope something was said tonight to encourage you. Don't lose your first love. We can't do this thing without God. We need him. Never make that mistake and allow your emotions to overtake the fact that we need God. I thank you for being with us on tonight. We look forward to seeing you all next week. Please visit us on Facebook, Instagram, or even visit our website at hensonmemorial.org. Until next week, this is Pastor Aaron H. Henson saying good night, and we'll see you next time. God bless.